Is Microsoft Unified Support busting your IT budget? Well, you're not alone. US Cloud is the global leader in third-party Microsoft enterprise support, and they're helping enterprises slash cost by 30 to 50% versus Microsoft Unified, all while getting faster response times from domestic engineers. No offshoring, no long waits, just expert support you can count on 24/7, 365. Trusted by 50 of the Fortune 500 companies and offering senior-level engineers with an average of 14 years experience with Microsoft technologies, US Cloud is the smarter alternative for premium Microsoft support without the premium price. Ready to make the switch? Book a call at uscloud.com to get started today. That's uscloud.com.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody's doing well. Another weekend perspective, and as you're listening to this, June has rolled around, and we are 5 months through the year, into the 6th month of the year. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's starting to warm up. Summer's just right around the corner. Official summer's right around the corner. I know it's started for some of you in certain parts of the world already. Kind of the heat is taking over. But anyways, normally weekend perspective, we get into, trying to connect the dots, trying to look at some bigger picture things. I do feel like the last couple of weeks, the weekend perspective has turned into let's challenge Brian about something and see if he will make some sort of response. Last week, we talked a little bit about, AI adoption and, the challenges of the last 5%. Matt Reeder had put out an article, which I thought it was a good article. I think it exemplifies, the concerns of, allowing sort of full AI autonomy to take over and what the challenges of that might be. And we sort of dove into that. We sort of dove into the pros and cons of, concern about AI adoption versus, kind of going in more aggressively. Thought we dove into that pretty well. This week, had a chance to be challenged about something sort of I'd never really heard of before, something called a McGuffin, which I had to do a little bit of homework on, a little bit of research. Apparently, it is a concept that's often used in theater, in movies, and so forth to sort of be a distraction. So I was challenged by the good folks over at Software Defined Talk to sort of dive into, whether or not this concept of McGuffin, and we'll make it more realistic as we dive into it. But is that something we're going to be seeing in some of the large AI games that are starting to play out? So I was going to dive into that right after the break. Today's show is brought to you by Vasion. Print is one of the biggest drains on IT resources, but did you know there's an easy solution? Just eliminate print servers. They're resource intensive and likely the bane of your IT team's existence. Vasion Print, formerly known as Printer Logic, lets you simplify infrastructure and maximize resources by replacing print servers with direct IP serverless print. Reduce attack surfaces and secure your environment while still enjoying cloud-native flexibility that easily supports a hybrid workforce. Less complexity, less headaches, and less time wasted. And with built-in AI and automations, it's a solution that just works. See for yourself by scheduling a demo at vasion.com. That's VASION.com. And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to dive into sort of a challenge that was thrown out to me, kind of a different weekend perspective challenge, but a challenge thrown out. And the context of it was this thing called a McGuffin, which it is, I'm going to read this. I'd never heard the word before. I'm obviously not educated enough to sort of know a lot of things, but a McGuffin is, I'm going to read this from Wikipedia, which is obviously the ultimate source from the internet. It says, in fiction, a McGuffin, sometimes McGuffin, is an object, device, or event that is necessary to the plot and the motivation of the characters, but insignificant, unimportant, or irrelevant in itself. And then it goes on to provide a bunch of examples of that. The one I guess that would be most relevant for me, they mentioned that R2-D2 was considered to be a McGuffin in the Star Wars movies, maybe the original Star Wars trilogy, for those of you that the original three were the original three for you. But anyways, the real context of this was the good folks over at Software Defined Talk were chatting about the recent acquisition of Jony Ive's IO company by OpenAI, and also some of the interesting, I guess maybe is the word interesting, sort of press that was put out around that announcement and what could possibly come from it. But really, the conversation and what's spawning this weekend's weekend perspective was kind of the question that was thrown out there of, why are they announcing this right now? IO doesn't necessarily, have any products already. IO is a company that, again, founded by Jony Ives, plus apparently staffed by a number of folks from, the design world, particularly from the Apple design world, plus I'm sure a number of others. I don't want to, misspeak or leave out anybody, but basically the concept was, the folks who invented the iPhone and lots of cool stuff, at Apple during the Steve Jobs heyday, and since then, had started their own design firm. We're trying to think about what the future might look like. And apparently they'd been doing some stuff behind the scenes with OpenAI for the last couple of years and really kind of thinking about, what would the next generation type of device look like? So, if we think about this in context, obviously, the first sort of computing device, the mainframe, and then subsequently we've seen things get smaller and smaller since then from, the mini computer, the green screen attached to those types of devices. We started to get into smarter devices like PCs, sort of wired PCs, fixed mobility PCs. Eventually, we got into laptops. Then eventually, we got into music devices like Zune and iPod, and then eventually we got into the smartphone, and we've since moved on to all sorts of other connected smaller devices and so forth. So, we've already begun to see kind of a early days of some of the connected AI devices. So we've seen, AI attached to glasses like the Meta glasses. We've seen AI attached to some of these sort of wearable types of devices. Some have been more successful than others. In fact, you probably might argue that none of them have really been successful. But when you take the enormous amounts of money that OpenAI have raised, as have tons of AI companies at this point, but you combine that with the design prowess and background of experience of somebody like Jony Ive, Jony Ive, Jony Ivey, Jony Ive. Anyways, the guy who says things like aluminium instead of aluminum. It is an interesting thing because it sort of borders on the possibility of, we all know the success of the iPhone. We know the success of smartphones in general, Android phones and so on and so forth. I mean, I think the number now out there is about 6 billion of them exist in the world. Maybe there's a few more of those, at least one for every person out there. And it begins to sort of ask the question, like, what might happen for designing the next thing? Because at some point, while, an Instagram is popular or Spotify is popular or, whatever your favorite gaming platform is, they are popular because they run on something. And I think the question that a lot of people are trying to figure out is, will the next, will the big thing in AI be driven by, another portable device? Will it be driven by something, will the biggest next types of, the next Spotify, the next Instagram, the next whatever it might be, go back to a bigger screen because, we're talking about lots of information? Or is it possibly going to be driven by something that, as of now, we haven't really been able to think about the same way that, we really didn't totally conceptualize what would change in our lives when we had the entire internet in our pocket through a smartphone or a smart device and things like that. So people could argue, yes, I knew it was going to happen because I knew what a Newton looked like, but no, you didn't. You didn't really know. But the question that was posed by the good folks over at Software Defined Talk, and I think Cote in particular, was, the IO folks don't have a product at this point. It's not as if you can point to it. And there's some, prototypey stuff that's been floating around on the internet, some puck-shaped things and some other stuff like that. But, is this something that, we would expect to see an immediate type of device coming along? Is this something that, this is an announcement because, the world hasn't quite figured out what's possible with all these things yet? Maybe it's really dependent on GPT-5. Maybe it's really dependent upon, some next big breakthrough, some sort of NLP, natural language sort of breakthrough. We're not really sure what that's going to be, right? Is it, we're seeing more and more types of glasses, types of devices, whether it's, the Meta glasses or, the Google Glass or the Apple Vision Pro or whatever it might be, all those things that were sort of attached to your face. I think we're all trying to figure out, like, will there be yet another thing that we have to buy, to carry around, to power up? Will it be, how connected to our lives will it be? And so, anyways, the whole point of this challenge and is not so much for Brian to guess what that thing might be, because the odds are I'm probably not going to get it right. In fact, I can guarantee that I won't get it right. If I did, it would be a complete fluke. I wouldn't bet on it. But the question that we're kind of looking at in this weekend perspective is: should somebody like OpenAI rush to get something out there, not to get something out there, but to announce something, right? And this partnership that they have, this acquisition they have, is obviously something that's been announced. But what does that do in the marketplace? And is it a good idea to try and pre-announce something, whether it's real or whether it's vaporware? And what's some of the history of that, and why might companies do that, and why companies might not do that, right? So I thought, okay, let's dig into that, from what we know, right? And this will probably end up being kind of a combination of some consumer things as well as some enterprise things, because I know the audience is sort of a mix of that. Now, the first thing that we obviously have to keep in mind is that we are dealing with real technology, and to a certain extent, it does feel like sometimes we are, because of the amounts of money that are being thrown around and the sort of people aren't really sure what's going to happen. Like, there's a good possibility that we're going to see some things that are real technology, but also are going to feel almost maybe like a parody, sort of like the TV show Silicon Valley. And so my first thought when I sort of saw this thing was the famous scene with Russ Hanneman when he sort of is first meeting the guys, and they talk about building. They're struggling with their service. They're worried about how much the service is going to cost, and they say, well, as soon as we have a subscription service and we start announcing revenue, and Russ jumps in and he goes, no, you don't want to announce revenue. You don't ever want to have revenue. You always want to be pre-revenue, because if you're pre-revenue, then the possibilities are unlimited, or sort of, unlimited in terms of, how big you can get. Once you start announcing revenue, then you've sort of set the bar for, how people can measure you. And put a link in that if you've never seen it. It's great. Really gets into the essence of what is ROI. But, I think the bigger thing becomes, if you are making big announcements like this, or let's suppose they announce that they think a device or a thing or whatever is coming out soon, why would you go about doing that, right? And it's a kind of a complicated situation, because on one hand, more and more of what we see get announced and then it's available. In fact, things will get sort of pre-announced. Maybe you pre-announce it to the influencers in that space, and you give them early access to something. You give somebody beta access, and so you create a level of kind of hype, but also a level of only a certain number of people can get it. And so you create demand around scarcity. So we see that a lot with software. We see that a lot with, hey, something is readily available, please sign up for it now. And in fact, not only do you want to create early buzz and early interest, you want to create scarcity, but maybe you actually also want to officially or unofficially create like the situation in which, so many people downloaded this thing, or so many people signed up for accounts, and in fact overwhelmed our servers, which meant it overwhelmed our initial forecast of what could happen, right? So there's that technique that people will do, and sometimes that technique is done on purpose, and it's kind of a ruse, and sometimes they'll do it because they had no idea that like a chat GPT, they had no idea that it was going to grow to hundreds of millions of people using the product, right? So on one hand, you set the it's an interesting thing, because like I said, so much of what we put out there today, while it may not be perfect on day one, which in most cases it's not, a lot of times, especially with software things, you want someone to go use it, right? And whether it's open source or what's a SaaS service or it's a download or whatever it is, you want somebody to use it sort of on day one, because you only get so much buzz, you only get so much attention, you only get so much hype from the marketplace, right? So if you're going to create something that you are knowingly creating a McGuffin, or you're creating vaporware, or you're creating something that's not available, you kind of have to ask yourself, like, okay, well, what am I doing? What are the possible pros and cons of doing that, versus just sort of being ready with a minimum viable product or something that you just want to get out in the public and you want to see what the feedback is, because you have your moment, you have your announcement, you have your timing, right? So there's a couple of reasons, pros and cons, and let's sort of walk through these and we'll try and give some examples of this, right? So the first one might be that you're trying to set a big ambition for the company, right? You want to set out a huge goal of where you think your company is going. And in the case of like OpenAI, obviously we've seen them, talk about, changing the world and doing AGI and super AGI and, what this is going to mean in terms of, current jobs versus future jobs, what it's going to mean for, accelerating, finding cures for diseases and illness and, unlocking all sorts of new creative opportunities and, all the millions of things that are possible or have been talked about with AI, right? So you might do that, and you might throw out some examples, because if you're talking about these really big abstract things, it's often hard for people to kind of wrap their head around, like, oh, okay, well, what does that really mean? What does that really mean to me in my day-to-day life? But if you can put a little bit of reality to it, it gives you the chance for someone to go, oh, okay, I could see myself in that role. I could see myself being like that person. I could see myself using that service, or I could see that impacting my day to day, right? So you may set a huge ambition, which might be useful internally for your company, and also may help try and set the market, steer the market, drive the market upwards. But you also want to have some tangible touch points, right? So that might be a thing, but your tangible touch points might still be vaporware, and so that may be looked at as sort of like, that's a positive thing. But it's still going to take us a little while. But I've given you some tangible things, some things to be anxious about. Let's do that. The second thing that you might do, and these start to get into more competitive things, is you may want to probe the market for ideas, right? The same way that oftentimes we see, kind of rumors get leaked out. Oh, this company might buy this other company, or this company might make this decision to make a big change about what they do. Oftentimes, those things that get put out there as sort of rumors, they may be real, and the company might just be sort of leaking them through, kind of known channels or unknown channels or trusted channels to see what the market might respond to. And then they, depending on what that response might be, they have the ability to go, oh, no, that's completely a rumor. We had nothing to do with that. Or you can kind of go, well, I'm not going to say anything right now. And maybe you're signaling to the world of like, okay, that was what we were hoping to get, or actually that was better than we were hoping to get, but we're not really ready to do that yet. But let's kind of go quiet on it and create some anticipation and some buzz around something. So, the other reason you might start doing this is to kind of probe the market, to get a sense for like, hey, we're thinking about doing this thing, but I don't really want to totally commit to it because it is a big, it's a big change, it's a big new, it's a big unknown, and I kind of would like to get the zeitgeist to debate it a little bit. Maybe they're going to think through some cases and use cases and ramifications that we hadn't thought through. So that may be what you're trying to do. Another third thing you might be trying to do is, we see this quite a bit with with Elon Musk's companies and Tesla to a certain extent, right? Like you might be trying to get the market to pump up your valuation. So if you say, hey, we're going to be doing something that is, completely new, completely different in the marketplace, we think it's going to add all this value to the company or all this value into the marketplace. You might be doing something in which, this is, kind of borderline questionable, whether it's legal or moral or whatever, but she might be sort of trying to pump up your company in order to drive valuation up. And that actually might allow you to do some other things, right? So if your company was worth $50 billion and it can get pumped up to $60 or $70 billion, that extra valuation might be, leverage that you can use to acquire something or to take on something new that you hadn't planned to do, right? So we've seen examples of this. Obviously, Tesla stock is probably the best, most easy example where, Elon has talked about self-driving cars or robotaxis or, self-driving trucks or whatever it is, and things that haven't necessarily matured or materialized. But the value of the company has, kind of, or at least for a while, had boosted quite a bit. And that gave him a lot of leverage to do other things and so forth. So you see those as all sort of potentially positive reasons why you might do this, right? Another couple of reasons you might do this, and these may seem like they're more on the negative side, but again, when you're talking about sort of strategic decisions, there's always pros and cons, and you might be looking at a short game versus a long game. One of the things you might be trying to do is distract the market from current challenges in your company, right? So, the market may be wanting to say, hey, let's talk about product X that you currently have, or the market conditions around, product Y or project, Z or whatever it might be. And you might go, none of those are going very well for our company. They're delayed. They're costing me more than I thought. Somebody else has sort of jumped into that market. And so you might use a vaporware discussion, a McGuffin or whatever you call it, to distract the market from your current situation. You might say, look, I know you're all over here looking at this and thinking about that. That's too small a way of thinking. That's old thinking about what you do. What I need you to be focused on is this new thing, this new way of thinking, this new product that's coming down the market, this new thing that we're going to be able to leapfrog where we are today, leapfrog our competition and get to something new, right? So it's a way of sort of distracting the market from either something that you don't feel confident in or something that you're working on but you're struggling in, right? Another one is you may want to distract your competitors to go chase something where they don't have strengths, right? And, again, we see this quite a bit. We're seeing this a lot in the AI space, right? We're seeing everybody, for example, coming out with coding assistants or autonomous agents, whatever they're calling them. We're seeing everybody, we're seeing a lot of companies chasing being the biggest frontier model and so forth, right? We're seeing a lot of probably companies are laying out similar types of roadmaps, but oftentimes when something gets announced, other companies go chasing it, right? And, NVIDIA is, involved with this quite a bit. I mean, it's, Jensen telling everybody, hey, if you're a day behind, you're really a year behind, all those sort of things. So you can use these to distract your competitors to go chase something where they don't have strengths, right? So if you are an OpenAI, you are Google, you are, whoever it might be, Microsoft, you might say, well, let's announce something in a space if we distinctly know that our competitors really don't have an advantage in that space. We might not be great at it yet, but if it gets them to take 10 or 15% or 20% or something of their resources and move them away into an area where we know they're probably not going to have strengths, they're not going to do that. But we think, well, they're going to think they need that thing. They're going to go chase something. That potentially offers you an advantage, right? You may not necessarily have anything to sell, but it might distract your competition to focus on something that you don't think they're necessarily going to be successful at, and it takes up, resources that could be used somewhere else. Right. And then, sort of the last thing I had on my list was it's a technique that we see a lot. And we see this quite a bit, like in the enterprise, from established companies, from incumbent companies, sometimes dominant companies, where, they will announce something, they will pre-announce something, and they very well might be on their roadmap. But they're seeing the competition start to come along. They're starting to see the marketplace go, hey, that old way of doing things, maybe it's got some cracks in the armor. Maybe it's not as good as this new thing that's coming along. Maybe if we start to, if the market starts to change its way of thinking about something, they may start looking to buy in that other space, and they might start realizing, oh, that other space is, that other way of doing things is really good. It's really efficient. It's really, we like it for various reasons. And it starts to break down your moats. It starts to get into this, right? Like, so, this is where we see, in the AI space, Google being concerned about their search monopoly, or, Facebook about their ad monopoly, or, Google with their ad monopoly. And, you see Perplexity, or you see OpenAI, or you see Anthropic go, hey, we include search in there, and we're not throwing ads at you yet. And people starting to go, oh, well, maybe the ad monopoly is going away. Maybe the search monopoly is going away. If you can kind of come back and go, oh, no, we include AI with our search, right? Like, we're just as good in the thing that you're starting to adopt as this new behavior. We can go about doing that. We also see it in the enterprise space. VMware jumps to mind, Oracle jumps to mind. The companies that are really big and incumbent, where they're constantly just adding things to their bundle, adding things to their kind of extendable, adjacent to their core products, and whether or not they're available yet, it allows the companies that currently have big investments in them to potentially go, well, maybe we should just stall looking at that new company, looking at that new way of doing things, because the company that we know, the company that we trust, They said they're going to do it. And I mean, if they're going to do it, they have a track record of doing this really, really well. I think they're probably going to get there. Boy, they're already talking about how much they know about this stuff. And while they're a year behind or 2 years behind, we're not really in a big rush to make big changes, right? We're the enterprise companies, we tend to move slowly. And so you see that a lot. You see it kind of used as a technique to stall your competitors or stall your customers from, evaluating or buying something else that might, again, disrupt your moat. So, I think if we look at all those things, there are lots of reasons, both, positively oriented, again, trying to set big ambitions, trying to get the market to believe that your vision is where things should go. But we also see them in ways that might be perceived as sort of negative, but really are, potentially just, sort of strategic ways of, affecting your competitors, affecting your customers' buying decisions, which might just simply be as much as the timing of what they do or how many resources they put on something versus something else. And so, I think what we're seeing with OpenAI, and again, we may try and figure out a way to start, guessing what that thing that they might build. They bought a company for $6.5 billion. That's a significant investment. It's probably in the top 20 or 30, all time. Maybe it's in the top 100 all time sort of tech investments. It's a lot of money. What might they do? But I think, OpenAI is doing the things that you would expect, which is, they're putting big names out there. They're kind of hinting at the idea that, smart people who have track records of doing things are very likely to continue to do interesting things. So you should be paying attention to them. And so, yeah, they do, sort of buy themselves, a level of credibility, but sort of the benefit of the doubt that, even though you can't necessarily forecast what it's going to be, and even though they may not necessarily know what it's going to be, they've bought themselves enough goodwill and enough potential and enough, kind of what might happen, that it's it is it can be distracting to the other companies, again, whether you're Google or or Facebook or Apple or anybody, IBM or anybody in this space, but it also it gets the market talking about what's possible. And you may figure out, hey, the market sure seems to be talking about this a lot. And we have something that looks kind of like that in our repertoire. Maybe we put that out earlier than we thought to. So it's an interesting technique. I think, it has, again, its pros and cons. I think, it can be very viable. Hopefully it doesn't become, sort of the same type of thing that we see with Elon, with Tesla and all the promises for things that, in some cases haven't really panned out, especially on the autonomous driving side, which obviously is a challenging problem. But this is going to be, probably one of the biggest things that's going to be talked about throughout the rest of the year. The tie-up of IO and OpenAI, I'm sure they will be leaking things, periodically, intelligently, to different reporters, to different influencers, to different people who are going to get little chunks and tastes of things until, the next thing comes out. And that next thing might be the next iPhone, but it might also be the next Vision Pro, or it might be, a set of glasses that they want everybody to wear. And everybody says, well, that's fine, but I'm 20 something years old and I'm never going to meet my mate looking as goofy as I look like this. So, the possibilities are everywhere in between there. That spectrum is going to be pretty wide, but it's going to be fun to watch. It's fun to be at the beginning of, maybe a next computing paradigm. And, whether it's, people who have done this before that will come up with the idea, or it will be a totally unknown group like the folks at Instagram who were, totally unknown and brand new, come up with the next big thing. So anyways, all fun to watch, all fun to sort of pay attention to, and gives us some fodder to talk about whether we're, seeing the next big thing or the next big McGuffin. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Thanks for the challenge. Enjoy kind of going exploring this stuff. And if you've got other challenges you want me to explore, or just topics you want us to explore, happy to dig into that, whether we do it on the Wednesday show or the Sunday show. So with that, folks, we'll wrap it up and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.